we may as well get right into it. 110% we get right into it, because as soon as I mentioned, hey, if you want to do the PayPal dono thing to help support me, or go to my Patreon, or, you know, any other way you want to support me on this channel, subscribing on Twitch, any of that, I would greatly appreciate that, because I like knowing where my funding comes from. I like knowing where the money I use to put food on the table comes from. Like, for instance, I know that some of it comes from HelloFresh. They are currently sponsoring the channel, so some of the money does come from there. But that said, the reason that I am harping on that as much as I am is because, guys, did you know that apparently Tim Pool, and by extension a lot of right-wing channels on YouTube, apparently have been bought with Russian money? Because I didn't know that. I thought these people were, you know, free speech warriors. I thought these people were the types of people who would try to say that, oh, they're independent thinkers. They're the types of people that, why would they be bought? And they have such large channels. Why would they need that kind of money? In what world would they need that kind of money? But apparently, that is not the case. Apparently, there's a lot of these people who have been indicted in a recent Department of Justice thing. I'll show you guys here in just a second. So let's go ahead and take a look at what has actually happened. So the Justice Department has charged 2 Russian media operatives with an alleged scheme. Now, what happened here, very briefly, before we get into the article from WAPO, is Chen, who we've done a lot of content on this channel, apparently was paid for by Russia. Millions of dollars went to Chen, specifically for the purpose of using her media outlet company, Tenet Media, to try to disrupt the United States elections, trying to disrupt a lot of shit where the U.S. is concerned. Let me move Blizzy where he's supposed to go, and let me go ahead and move that playmat away, because we don't need that. We have that for Vice Rhino's channel being here. So she's apparently in a decent bit of trouble, but let's take a look at the news article and see what there is to uncover about this. And it's not just this. We've got plenty of stuff to go into besides this here. But the Justice Department on Wednesday charged 2 Russian media executives in an alleged scheme that authorities say illegally funneled millions of dollars to a Tennessee-based company to create and publish propaganda videos that racked up millions of views on United States social media. The 32-page federal indictment accuses Konstantin Kolizhnikov and Elena Avanesvay, I can't pronounce that, I'm terribly sorry, who are employees of RT, a Russian state news site formerly known as Russian Today, of conducting a money laundering operation that spent nearly $10 million in efforts to covertly influence public opinion and sow social divisions, including placing blame on Ukraine regarding the war in Russia. Authorities say the U.S. company, which was not identified by name in the indictment, allegedly created and posted hundreds of English-language videos on social media sites, including TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and X, that echoed Russian state propaganda and garnered 16 million views on YouTube alone. Now, apparently, this violates the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which carries a maximum sentence of 5 years in the United States. And apparently money laundering is a thing that can get you in for 20 years as well. Now, as of 28 minutes ago, YouTube ended up terminating Tenet Media and all the other channels that were run by Chen, who was one of the conservative influencers who was linked in the Russian-paid operations against the United States to sow right-wing content in the United States, which is just nuts. Scrolling down further in the WAPO article, YouTube took down several right-wing politics channels that have been linked with allegations from the Justice Department that Russian government employees were paying right-wing influencers in the United States to produce content. That's fucking wild, right? Isn't that so weird that these independent free thinkers that just happen to end up being super conservative and right-wing and just happen to be very anti-American democracy and just happen to be very pro-Russian propaganda, but never in a full-on, like, full-in-your-face way, almost always in a very light, like, oh, I like the United States, but Russia isn't the worst in the world. Look, they've got the Christianity, they've got the anti-homosexuals, they've got all of the based stuff, and yet here we are. Continuing on here, the Google-owned video site, YouTube, terminated Tenet Media and 4 other channels run by right-wing media entrepreneur Lauren Chen as part of the company's ongoing efforts to combat coordinated influence operations. On Wednesday, the Justice Department indicted 2 employees of the Russian government-backed media organization RT. We already went over that from the previous article. Tennessee Business Records lists Lauren Chen and her husband Liam Donovan as the owners of Tenet Media. On Thursday, Chen's contributor contract with conservative media organization Blaze TV was also terminated. Prosecutors allege that the founders of the media company in the indictment knew their funding was coming from Moscow and privately acknowledged in messages to each other that their backers were Russian. Tenet Media did not immediately return a request for comment sent through a contact form on its website. YouTube was the main place where videos were produced for Tenet Media and brought in plenty of media personalities that were conservative, such as Tim Pool, Benny Johnson, and Dave Rubin. In the weeks after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, YouTube took down Russia Today's channels, which had been globally popular on the platform. YouTube is the only major social media site still available in Russia where it remains popular, but in recent months, the Russian government has stepped up its throttling of the site, degrading quality for many users in the country. Now, again, this is kind of nuts. And I'm just going to say this right now. Isn't it funny how treasonous it would be to take a known enemy of the United States and accept money from them in order to fuel your operations? I would say that's awfully treasonous. Personally, it's quite weird, which, you know, might be one of the reasons that this particular clip ended up getting scrubbed off of Tim Pool's channel, because, well, if Laura Loomer is going to talk about a certain thing that should happen to people who do treason against the United States...
We were talking about crime and punishment, and Donald Trump needs to go after these people. Laura was saying, take the gloves off, stop being nice to them, fuck them. And I said, they should all be arrested, there should be lists. Laura said, we should give anyone who committed treason the death penalty, and then the show gone. Because YouTube doesn't allow calls for the death penalty.
So there's the follow-up from when Tim Pool had to play damage control for Laura Loomer, salivating that she wants enemies of the United States to be murdered, to be killed. And yet, you know, it's really strange here. These are the same people who are accepting money from enemies of the United States to sow propaganda in the United States, to influence the political minds of people in the United States. Man, isn't it so weird when you advocate for this shit, how it ends up being projection? If you're gonna advocate for the jailing and the killing of treasonous people in the US, then maybe you should do yourself a favor and not be some of those fucking treasonous people in the United States. You might have a better time of it if you're doing that. But it's not just Tim Pool. You know what's really cool about Tenet Media? If they got millions of dollars from Russia, we can assume that most of the shit on the channel was Russian disinformation, right? If we are going to be following the money, as we usually should in situations like this. So what would you say if we had this lovely set of tweets from Elon Musk where he's just constantly reposting their shit from, you know, Benny Johnson and and Tim Pool and other people who were part of that whole media kerfuffle. Isn't that great? Isn't that wonderful? Isn't it cool that we have all of this shit from Elon saying, don't people realize that George Soros wants open borders, literally not even checking to see if they're convicted serial killers on the run, which has happened more than once. Ah, yes. Don't worry, Elon. We believe that you have the exact opinion on border control that you should have. Now, granted, you're not bought by Russian media in the same way because they couldn't hand Elon Musk $10 million and say what we want, because Elon at least has more money than $10 million. So I don't know what to say besides he's retweeting them constantly, and that's really fucking weird, right? Estending says, right-wing grifters are Russian back to tell me something I didn't know. See, the funny thing is, we didn't know that. We couldn't claim to know that before, but now we can claim to know that at least a good handful of media influencers who are right-wing in the United States are bought and paid for by the Russian government. We can say that with evidence and with the amounts of money that actually ended up coming there as well. Destiny had something to say about it too over on Twitter, saying, LMAO, Tim Cast, Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, and Benny Johnson almost earned more in a single year from a Russian money laundering scheme than Hunter Biden earned his entire time working on the board of Burisma. And it's on page 26 of the indictment. We actually have the entire indictment right here. RT, formerly known as Russia Today, is a state-controlled media outlet funded by the government of Russia. After Russia invaded Ukraine, RT was sanctioned, dropped by distributors, and ultimately forced to cease formal operations in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom. Now, when you're going through and looking at where your money comes from, it's really, really awkward. It's incredibly strange to sit there and think for even a moment that any of this is okay. When you're looking at your spreadsheet and going, well, 80% of what we got came from Russia paying us to do disinformation. I guess that's okay. I mean, I don't have a spine. Do you? Like, again, let me go ahead and tell you. If you are a YouTube channel making anywhere between 10 and 80,000 views per video, and you're releasing daily content, if you're making that much, you're probably earning a few $1,000s a month off of YouTube, which is enough to live off of in most areas of the United States that are not major cities or, terribly gentrified. I think it's perfectly reasonable and perfectly okay to make a living wage and be okay with that. You don't need to become an instant millionaire because Russia wants you to lie to US citizens so they can fuck with US citizens. Weird. Metageta says, thankfully, enemies of the state is a status determined by the State Department of Congress and not randos in Midway, North Carolina. Yeah, imagine if Laura Loomer was actually able to determine who the enemy of the state was. That would be a terrible situation. There would be an actual bloodbath if that was the case. This is what people like Vice Rhino mean when they say that they could make so much more money if they just didn't have morals. And of course, Fennec the Rabbit is echoing that in the chat as well. You could make a lot of money if you don't have morals in this space. You really can. Like, using faceless AI-generated content can make you a lot of money. You can make a lot of money by doing a Why I Left the Left entire grift, because there is more money in being right-wing than being left-wing in the United States. There is a reason why the conspiracy theorists when right-wing conspiracy theorists, when they're talking about lefties, are always having to point to George Soros as their funder. They are always having to do that because they can't think of that many other people who are spending a fuck ton of money on left-wing causes, because there just isn't that much money in being left-wing. Most of the audience, when you are left-wing, is also fucking poor. There's not a whole lot of money to be made in it, because the people in this space, the users in this space, are not the richest people on the planet. The users in this space are generally regular-ass Joe Schmoes. When you go into the right-wing spaces, when you go into those spaces, it tends to be a little easier to find money, because while the regular Joe Schmoes are still there, and there may be even more of them when you consider the people who are in rural areas, unfortunately, there are also major interest groups that want to do things like get tax loopholes for themselves, that want to do things like get incentives from the US government for themselves, subsidies from the US government for themselves. When enough of these people exist, and they have enough money, then more money is going to naturally flow there. There's a reason why we can point to multiple areas like the Koch brothers and the Heritage Foundation, and in this case, fucking Russia, when we are talking about places where right-wing money comes from in the United States. We don't have to put the tinfoil hat on and go, George Soros. We can just look at the Department of Justice's indictment of their shit. That's a thing we get to do. That's a thing we get to do. It's super cool. It's a super easy thing that we get to do in situations like this. And then when this happens, this other strange thing ends up happening. On top of that, you end up having the fallout, the absolute nuclear fallout. Now, of course, when you go into conservative areas for this conversation, you tend to hear stuff like this.
They were being paid.
Well, you would hear it if we could actually hear anything on Twitter, but that has got to be one of the worst regulated places in the audio department. Let's try that again.
By this generous benefactor, and it turns out actually it was RTTV.
All right, so people here took money and they didn't know where the money was coming from, and it didn't change the way they talked on the internet.
No.
Got it. That was worth a press conference. I'm really glad Garland came out and said something.
All right, so Fox News playing defense for them is wild to me, because it's not that these people didn't know where the money was coming from. It's not that Tenet Media and Lauren Chen didn't know where the money was coming from. They had private conversations about how the money was coming from Russia, and the money was coming for one of two reasons. There's one of two situations that are absolutely terrifying to think about, okay? Scenario one, each of these people was getting money to say something. That's terrifying enough. Knowing the way that Russia treats its political opponents, that's an absolutely terrifying thing to think about, these people being in the Kremlin's fucking pocket. However, the other thing, which is equally scary to think about, is the fact that if Russia Today and Russia media influencers see that you're propagandizing and are just willing to go, hey, we like the kind of propaganda you're selling. We like the kind of stuff you're saying. We're just going to send you money because you're already doing a good enough job. I hope you see how in either one of those situations, whether it be the situation where they don't where they are directly influencing the things that you're saying, or they just happen to think it's already good enough, so they're going to send you money anyway, and that money is to the tune of millions of fucking dollars. Both of those scenarios are terrifying, and of course, it makes sense that Fox News, of all organizations, disgraced Fox News, that can't even call itself a news organization legally. They have to call themselves news entertainment. They legally cannot be called news. People who willingly have to play defense for people like Tucker Carlson while he was employed there, saying that nobody would take anything he said seriously, despite him being the most popular newscaster in the world at the time. It makes perfect fucking sense to me that these dipholes would be the ones defending the Russian propagandists. And if these dipholes are the ones defending the Russian propagandists, then you can already guess what my first thought is. My first thought is that some of the money is going into their pockets as well. That's my first fucking thought. Now, unlike Lauren Chen, who we do have a DOJ article about, who we do have news articles about, who is losing every single channel that she has on YouTube right now, unlike Lauren Chen, who we have actual proof has received money from these Russian propagandists, I don't have proof that Fox News is receiving money from Russian propagandists. This one is a tinfoil-hatted guess, but the difference between me and some of the fuckheads like that is I'm willing to admit this is a tinfoil-hatted guess. That's it. Now, the funny thing about this, more than anything, is if we look at how Tim Pool had previously engaged with the conversation about Ukraine. If we look at the way that Tim Pool had engaged in the conversation about Ukraine, we find something very, very interesting. Hey, check this out.
And they know it. But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong, I know. You've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
Does it make anyone even a little bit surprised? Have any of you been made surprised by that? Does that make sense to you? Isn't that so strange? Isn't that super weird? That the guy who we now know has received some amount of significant money from Russia is saying all of this very, very, very pro-Russia bullshit. And it's not just him. It's not just Tim Fool proving... Dimfool. It's not just Tim Pool proving that he's a Russian plant. Well, I wouldn't say he's a Russian plant, but he definitely received enough money to be considered in the same leagues as them. But if we look at people who historically have been very friendly with Russia, the Trumps, for instance, what happens when you get Donald Trump Jr. on a podcast with Tim Pool to talk about Russia? Well, you get something kind of like this.
On the solution to the Ukraine war.
Cut off the money. It's the only way you get them to the table, right? As long as, we're literally creating the oligarch class of billionaire in Ukraine with whatever's being siphoned off, whether it's...
Yes, the oligarch class of billionaire, of which Donald Trump Jr. definitely isn't a part of. I'm just going to say this right now. This motherfucker has definitely learned every single tool in his dad's playbook, except the charisma one. He doesn't have that one. He's got the same int modifier, the same constitution modifier. The one modifier he doesn't have right now is the charisma modifier. He's still sitting at about a -1 on that one. He can't claim he got that one from his daddy.
Zelensky, whether it's this, while they send young men to die as cannon fodder on the front lines because they couldn't care less. It's fucking disgusting what's going on there.
That's how all militaries work, dipshit. Every military that has ever been constructed in the history of the fucking world is comprised of people who either are very, very patriotic or do not have any other option. And yes, the politicians that send them out to die have never in the history of ever cared enough about it. Because if you cared enough about it, you wouldn't send them out to fucking die. But here's this thing. Politicians who recognize that we do have to send military members out for defense recognize that there is a risk involved. And while, yes, they may not care enough about the individual lives of the soldiers who are lost in this situation, yes, they can always care more. And I will say that from the top of my heart to the bottom of my lungs. Politicians will never care enough about the military and the people who are servicemen in the military. They always could care more. But if they cared enough, for instance, in the United States, we'd have a functioning VA. But we don't have a functioning VA. We have something that fucks over our military men when they come back after being traumatized by the shit that we put them through. But when it comes to Ukraine, Ukraine is being actively invaded by a hostile fascistic force. So, irrespective of the individual thoughts about individual politics in Ukraine in regards to their military, those people in that military are doing more than just being uber patriotic or not having a choice. Well, I guess they still are not having a choice, but the choice is a little different. It's not a financial not having a choice like what happens in the United States. It's closer to, if they don't defend their country folds to Russia. If they don't stop Russia, Russia turns them into Crimea 2 Electric Boogaloo, and then they become not Ukraine anymore. They become another wing of a pseudo-neo-USSR. Dorito Dave says, I'm on year 2 of my claim, and I just got a letter today asking for additional evidence, and I've given them 3 times this year already. Exactly. Exactly. Politicians have never, historically, and unfortunately, will never give enough of a shit about military men. They won't. They should. We need to have the VA completely overhauled, and we need to have it restructured, and we need to have it work far better for the people who work in our military who come back, especially I will say this from the bottom of my heart, especially the people who went into the military because they had no other choice and they wanted to transition. Especially those people. And this isn't just because I'm from a military family. This is also just the reality. If you are in a situation where you feel like you have to join the military, or you've been propagandized into joining the military irrespective, and you come back incredibly traumatized, or you come back with your body broken, injured, and fouled, there should be some way to get compensation for that. There should be some way to function better after that. But unfortunately, most people have to fight tooth and nail to get even a modicum of support from the VA. And unfortunately, grabbing the person at the other end of the conversation, grabbing the person at the other end of the teller booth will not make the VA operate faster, though I'm sure there's plenty of veterans who wish it would make it operate faster. But that said, back to Russian propaganda from people who definitely make a lot of money from Russian propaganda.
That it's allowed to happen, that we shut down anything. It's so obvious. Nothing's ever going to change there if the money keeps flowing. My father would have been like, hey, you got like one more month of this, and if you're not at the table, it's done.
Yeah.
Guess
What does at the table mean in regards to Ukraine and Russia? Like, okay, so what do you want Zelensky to do? Russia's going to come in and say, hey, I know we threw the first stone, and I know we've killed a shit ton of your people, but we just want the violence to end. And it can end by you joining Russia so we can become the glorious neo-USSR. That's not the thing you should be advocating for. I'm sorry. A complete cessation of violence on the side of Russia is required. And instead of doing that, instead of advocating for that, Donald Trump Jr. here with Tim Pool offering no fucking pushback is saying, actually, no. The correct thing to do is remove all ability for Ukraine to defend itself. The correct thing to do is let Ukraine fucking flounder. That's the correct thing to do, according to Donald Trump Jr. And if that isn't enough of a reason to think, oh, maybe voting for Trump this year would be a really fucking bad idea, just listen to the shit his son says, and his son is very on board with his dad.
Guess what? Zelensky wouldn't have a chance if we shut it down. So he'd come to the table, and they'd come up with something.
Absolutely.
No, that's not how that fucking works, you dumbass dork. If you think that's how the military works, if you think that's how an invasion works, then go to the fucking front lines yourself and have a blast. You seem to be an expert in how it functions. I'm sure you would survive, but we know he wouldn't. We know he wouldn't survive that. Just like I wouldn't survive that. Most people wouldn't survive that shit. But don't worry, we've all got great opinions on how Ukraine could stop this today. And in his words, Ukraine could stop the invasion today by just letting Russia run over and step on their fucking toes. And of course, Tim Pool, listening to this, is just scrolling on his phone like, yep, let all the Ukrainians die, yep, that's okay. But now we understand why. Now it makes perfect fucking sense. It's not just, that's a really weird opinion to have, Tim. That's a really strange thing to have. That's a really strange person to have on your show. That's really awkward to not really offer a whole lot of pushback on that. No, it's not weird anymore. It isn't strange anymore. We have all the evidence we need now. We know that a certain amount of money went into Tim Pool's pocket, and that money came from Russian influence. So what now? There we go. I found it. Now, Tim Pool has a defense ready for this. He says, my statement regarding allegations and the DOJ indictment. Should these allegations prove true, I, as well as the other personalities and commentators, were deceived and are victims. I cannot speak to anyone else at the company as to what they do or what they are instructed. The Culture War podcast was licensed by Tenet Media. It existed well before any license agreement with Tenet and will continue to exist after any such agreement expires. The only change with the agreement was that the location of the live broadcast moved to Tenet's YouTube channel. And TCW never produced any content for Tenet Media. Never, at any point, did anyone other than I have full editorial control over the show and the contents of the show. Examples of this include us talking about spirituality, dating, video games, and stuff that's apolitical. The show is produced in its entirety by our local team without input from anyone external to the company. TCW is separate is a separate company not associated with Timcast or any other properties. It exists solely for the production of the Culture War podcast. That being said, we still do not know what is true, as these are only allegations. Putin is a scumbag. Russia sucks donkey balls. And to the journalists who wish to jump the gun, create their own narrative, or lie about what's currently going on, you can eat my Irish ass. All right, cool. So, as somebody who's not a journalist and is probably jumping the gun on this, let me go ahead and make one thing entirely clear, Tim. It's very strange that your political positions just happen to be such that Russia would want to fund it. Your political positions are just, it's really weird. Even if you were not directly told what to do, or any editorial control was taken away from you, or any of that shit, it doesn't matter. What matters is you said a whole bunch of shit, and even if you didn't know, it is a massive red flag that what you've been saying is enough for Russia to go, hey, we should probably fund that. Maybe we should fund that. That would be a cool thing to do. In fact, actually, that's also the opinion that Not So Erudite had here as well. Even if you didn't know, it should be a massive concern to you that your content has been something Russia wants to support, and that you have been peddling Russian-approved talking points. If this doesn't cause you to pause yourself and think seriously about how you became so anti-American and correct that error, that it doesn't matter if you were not deceived and you're entirely the bad faith actor who cares more about clicks and money than truth, and everyone is now concerned that you are. The thing is, most of the people on the left have basically assumed that that's the type of person Tim Pool is from the get-go. We've assumed that he is a person who gets a fuck ton of money by stirring up drama and making right-wing people feel like they are heard, as opposed to telling the truth. Or, at the very least, he's an incredibly fucking deceived person himself. Either way, yes, if you are saying things that Russia, who is currently involved in their own act of war against an innocent nation, if your opinion is such that they want to fund your opinion because they think that you are a useful agent to them in one shape, way, or form, then maybe, just maybe, you should take a step back and realize, maybe I've been a stooge for a little bit of time. Maybe I've been fucking up just a bit. Now, it's interesting to me that after all of this shit, Tim Pool then goes on and says, upon reflection, I now understand that Ukraine is our greatest ally. As the breadbasket of Europe and a peace-loving people, we cannot allow the fascist Russians to continue their crimes against humanity. We must redouble our efforts and provide an additional $200 billion at once. Now, the funny thing is, a couple years back, Tim Pool made a tweet saying that he would try to start saying as much dumb shit as possible on his Twitter so that no one could take him seriously. Anybody who tried to paint Tim Pool as one person or another would fail in doing so. And all I'm going to say to that is, Poe's Law is a wonderful, wonderful tool. It says that when people are being overly satirical or overly extreme, it is impossible to tell the difference between a true believer and somebody who is actually being satirical, as long as the position is extreme enough. Tim Pool may be one of the best examples of Poe's Law out there, at least in his own mind. He thinks that he's doing something oh so interesting and oh so defensive of himself by being a clown on the internet so that nobody should take him seriously. But let's be honest, that entire post reeked of sarcasm. And of course, he follows it up saying Slava Ukraine in another post after that. This is why I ask for money on Patreon, by the way. This is why I ask for money from individual viewers on PayPal and other places where they want to donate, or subscriptions on Twitch. The reason I do that is because I know where that money is coming from, and I can make sure that I am giving stuff back to those individual viewers. And if I ever get to a point where that viewer doesn't want to support me or my channel and what they do, they can pull their support at any time. They can yank it away. And by it being a bunch of individuals supporting me as opposed to a giant media organization, I'm a lot more free to say the shit that's on my mind. I'm a lot more free to say the shit that is important to me, as opposed to having to say the shit that somebody who's dropping $10 million on my daddy company wants me to say, or might want me to say. But Apparently, and again, it's weird to me. It's weird to me that this post exists, of all things. But Tim Pool says that he's been contacted by the FBI as a potential victim of a crime. The FBI believes I have information relevant to an ongoing criminal investigation and have requested a voluntary interview. I will be offering my assistance in this matter. Tim, I don't know if you should go to that interview. That might not work out very well for you. And the comment section is filled with, hey, you should take a lawyer with you. Be careful. The FBI isn't on our side. This is a bad idea. There's nothing you're going to gain. You better bring a lawyer. Hey, maybe let legal handle this one. Stay frosty. I know you're a very wise man, but make sure you bring a few lawyers with you. Don't get Michael Flynn. In fact, can you send me the names of the agents who contact you? Michael Flynn would like to have a word with you. Apparently, even his own audience is recognizing maybe it's not such a good idea that Tim Pool go and talk with the FBI after this particular indictment. Lucky Uranium says, "Hi, sir, it's good to see you. Hello, how you doing?" So, yeah, no, this leaves a really weird taste in my mouth. This whole thing is strange. Lauren Chen losing all of her channels, rightfully deserved. Like, finally, that person is being taken off of the wider internet at large and is going to have to remake and rebrand herself elsewhere. Finally, that shit is happening. It is very disheartening to me. Being on a platform where so many people, Dave Rubin, Tim Pool, Lauren Chen, people with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of subscribers have had so much money funneled into them from Russia. Have had so much money funneled into them from not just people in Russia, but Russia Today, like actual Russian media organizations that are directly involved in creating propaganda and supporting propaganda that is in favor of Russia. It is terrifying to me to think that one of the most ubiquitous video platforms on the internet has so much of this propaganda that can be used to undermine shit like the United States elections. A long time ago, me and another YouTuber friend looked at a document from MI6, and this document had a lot of information in it about Russia. It was about how Russia would try to divide the United States on wedge issues, gun rights, abortion rights, trans issues, and they would try to make sure that the media apparatus in the United States was so focused on this that these would become issues that voters would have to focus on, that politicians would have to focus on. And, you know, at the time, it was more of a, hey, Russia's been responsible for a bunch of this shit, isn't that weird situation. But now we're seeing exactly how far that shit has actually reached. Like, CNN had some write-ups on this too, saying that the unnamed Tennessee-based company that the Justice Department alleges was being funded by Russian operatives working as part of the Kremlin-orchestrated influence program targeting the 2024 U.S. election is Tenet Media, which is linked to right-wing commentators with millions of subscribers on YouTube and other social media platforms. The indictment, unsealed in New York's Southern District, accuses 2 employees of Russia Today, the Kremlin's media arm, of funneling nearly $10 million in to an unidentified company described only as Company 1 in court documents. CNN has independently confirmed that Company 1 is Tenet Media, which is a platform for independent content creators. It is self-described as a network of heterodox commentators that focus on Western political and cultural issues. The alleged Russian operation tapped 2 people to set up the company in their names to add to its legitimacy, and the 2 founders were aware that Russian money backed the operation. The goal of the operation, according to prosecutors, was to fuel pro-Russian narratives, in part by pushing content and news articles favoring Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump and others who the Kremlin deemed to be friendlier to its interests. Among the commentators listed on the media website are Benny Johnson, Johnson, Tim Pool, and Dave Rubin, all of which have released statements saying that they were victims of the Russian scheme, and they maintained editorial control of the content they created. And again, I have to say, like before, you may have had complete control over the content you created, but it is still strange to me that certain people wanted to fund that content. Maybe this is time for a little bit of self-reflection for you, because, well, again, if you are being funded by these organizations, there is a reason for that. There is a reason for that. Now, Ashley St. Clair had a statement on this as well, saying a DOJ indictment suggests that Lauren Chen is an alleged Russian agent who is said to have accepted upwards of $10 million to start Tenet Media and push divisive and political rhetoric. Chen has encouraged Republicans to withhold their vote for Trump for not being conservative and pro-life enough. She has advocated against the 19th Amendment and said that Hamas rioters on college campuses were being arrested for free speech. She stated that Trump has abandoned Christian conservatives for the Enriques and Jamals. So, just trying to slur black people and Mexican people. Going to leave this clip here from an appearance I did with both of the people who, the people whose names I could not pronounce, actually, months ago, where I said I believed this rhetoric to be boosted by foreign influences and money to cause division before the election. Talent at Tenet Media, such as Benny Johnson and Tim Pool, appear to be victims by the DOJ's own indictment. Lauren Chen, however, appears to have been given direct instructions on content from the Russians. She has focused almost entirely on bashing Trump to be more conservative. And again, yes, if it does end up being that Tim Pool and others were victims here, as it says, then the question still remains, why was Russia willing to fund that, though? Why were they willing to put money in your pockets? You may be a victim in terms of you were doing a treasonous thing, and that's bad, but you were unaware that you were doing a treasonous thing, and that's bad, but it still stands that you were doing it, and we should have some questions about why that money even made it into your pockets in the first place. Now, granted, I would have to ask the same things about myself if I randomly got a donation of like several $1,000s and it was from, say, a Russia media plant. Like, I would have reasons to be a little concerned there. Like, maybe I've drifted a little too far to the right at this point. Stav says, because big names plus their dishonest rhetoric, said in pocketing the money. Yeah, it's... The whole situation is very, very bad. Now, there is a wonderful breakdown of some of the stuff in the DOJ's indictment from Igor Shishko. Kremlin agents in the U.S. with millions of Twitter followers were paid $10 million by Russia to spread disinformation and rally support for convicted felon Donald Trump on social media, per indictment unsealed by the Department of Justice. Talking points the U.S. citizen agents were told to disseminate by Russia in exchange for $10 million to help Donald Trump in the upcoming election. Political Party A is the Republican Party. Candidate A is Donald Trump. Political Party B is the Democratic Party. Candidate B is Joe Biden. So the campaign topics were, and this looks really, really familiar. So, as an example, when you get, when you are paid to do something, right? And you get a talking points document. This looks a lot like the talking points document that I got for, say, HelloFresh. And really, most places they'll have a document set up with like, these are the talking points you should focus on. This is the stuff you should say. And I'm really bad at reading those and paying attention to them, which is why I've tried to make up my own stuff in regards to that. I'd rather give reasons that I would support something as opposed to the reasons that the company wants me to say, because those ones sound more skeevy to me, just personally. But anyway, campaign topics. 1. Encroaching universal poverty, record inflation, halting of economic growth, unaffordable prices for food and essential goods. 2. Risk of job loss for white Americans. 3. Privileges for people of color, perverts, and the disabled. 4. Constant lies of the Democratic Party administration about the real situation in the country. 5. Threat of crime coming from people of color and immigrants, including new immigrants of Ukraine. Russia wanted Lauren Chen and other people to talk about how bad Ukraine was and how bad the people of Ukraine were and focus on that. That's, Really weird. Really weird that that one happened. I wonder if maybe, just maybe...
And they know it. But I don't know that it matters anymore. This is psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong, I know. You've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
God, isn't it so weird that conversation about how bad Ukraine is one of the things that they paid for? And Tim Pool here, victim Tim Pool, is just shouting that shit off the rooftops. That's so weird. That's so strange. Anyway, overspending on foreign policies at the expense of interests of white U.S. citizens. Wow, Tim, isn't it so weird that some of the campaign topics that you definitely didn't see and you're definitely a victim of and definitely were not things that you wanted to push yourself are the exact things that you were saying? Oh, we should stop all of our funding to Ukraine. That's so strange. That's so weird. Dark Excalibur, thank you for the hydrate. Tiburon, thank you very much for the stretch as well. Constant lies to the voters by the Democratic Party. Last but not least, America is suffering a defeat despite the Democrats' efforts. We are being drawn into the war. Our guys will die in Ukraine. That's what Russia wants the commentators to say, as Tim Pool, victim Tim Pool, talks about us pulling all of our military support, and it's super important for us to do that right now. God, isn't that's so fucking weird to me that Tim here, who definitely isn't paid for by the Kremlin, is spouting the shit that they want him to say. Tim Pool, victim. And again, I agree that he might actually have been a victim in this case. I agree that he may be not one of the people who knew the money was coming from Russia. But again, isn't it so strange that all of the words he's saying are the ones that Russia wanted him to say? Maybe it's a good idea, Tim, for you to take this on the nose and go, oh, man, if that's all the shit Russia wants us to say, and Russia's an enemy of the United States, maybe I should stop saying that shit. Maybe that would be a good thing to do. Target audience of the campaign. You are to target Republican voters, Republican supporters, supporters of traditional family values, and of course, white Americans who are lower, middle, and middle class. But never the lower class, never the working class. Don't actually support those people. No. Middle class all the way. Both political parties are guilty of this one, focusing so hard on the middle class because nobody wants to think that they're poor. Nobody wants to think that they're not middle class. So they'll hear the shrinking middle class and they'll go, oh, that's happening to me. And like, no, it's not happening to you. Statistically, it's not happening to you. Statistically, you were already fucked. Anyway, that's all I've got on this particular situation. It's a strange one. It's a strange one. If you want more info, then please go read the entire DOJ indictment yourself. It's available online publicly for you to take a look at if that's something that you want to do. But, again, the takeaway from this situation is if you are a content creator, you should look at the audience that you are cultivating. You should look at the people who are supporting you. Because the audience you have cultivated, much to my chagrin, and the people who are willing to send money to you, thank you Silent CDN for that, and also much to my chagrin, are a reflection of the YouTuber. The people who are willing to send you money and the people who are willing to be your followers on social media are a direct reflection of you and the things that you say. So if the people who are willing to send you money are Russian agents who are wanting you to say a bunch of anti-United States shit, then maybe you're an anti-United States shit. Maybe they're a reflection of you. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. I wanted to talk about this for the last 24 hours, and I wanted just a little more information to come out about it. If you remember, on the video that I did with Vice Rhino recently, the minute I saw this, it was 22 minutes old, and I was like, hey, are we going to talk about this? And he's like, no, it just came out, right? Like, yeah, but I want to talk about it. I'm glad I waited a little bit, because so much more came out in that amount of time. Anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already. Hey, maybe consider supporting my channel on Patreon so that you at least know that the money's coming from y'all and not random Russian operatives, right? Also, there's a link to the PayPal that you can see in the Twitch channel if you hit !dono. That all said, thank you all for your support. Thank you for being here. And as always, everybody, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, just wanted to give a quick thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who help keep me afloat and help keep this channel going. YouTube and Twitch are wonderful platforms, but at the end of the day, stability is not one of their strong suits. If you want to support my channel, then obviously Patreon is one of the best ways of doing that. Link is in the description. But I do want to personally thank everybody who has contributed to the channel. Those people would be Red Joker, Purple Poundini, Jemshin, Britzkrieg, Jupe the Malignant, Michael, Ravalern, Mabbity Babbity, Astral Frontier, Autumn and Angel, Nixie Chan, Mark Anthony, Victorian Alchemist, I'm not saying the last part of that, and you know that, Arcton Arclacier, Kiratorian, Dren Hadamata, Jordan M, John L, Lord Bleck, Smiling Game Master, and Fireshard. And everyone else who supports my channel and lets me do what I do full time. This is a dream job of mine that I never believed that I would be able to take full time, and with your help, I've been able to do it. So thank you so very much for that. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you all enjoy, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. I will see you all in the next one, hopefully.